Mr. De Klerk, thank you so much for joining us. It's been 30 years since that historic announcement. It was a defining moment. Has the thought ever crossed your mind in the past 30 years where you have said to yourself, what the hell was I thinking?
Good morning. Can I say, actually at the moment, it's almost to the minute, 30 years ago, that I started making that speech on the 2nd of February 1990. No, with the full advantage of hindsight, knowing what I know today, I would have made that same speech 30 years ago. It had to be done. It had to be done to bring justice to all. And it had to be done to avert the catastrophe in South Africa.
When you talk about a catastrophe, what do you mean?
I think we would have fallen into a civil war. I think hundreds of thousands of young South Africans from all sides would have died. I think the streets would have been drowned in blood. And in the end, we would have to negotiate. That's the catastrophe we averted. We could have looked like Syria today if we didn't do what we did at that stage and in the years that followed until we reached agreement on our final constitution.
Was this a decision taken by F W De Klerk or by the executive of the National Party 30 years ago?
The broad principles were agreed upon. We had Bush conferences as a cabinet, and I had the whole cabinet behind me for fundamental and far-reaching reform. A day or so before I delivered the speech, I called the cabinet together and I gave them that part of the speech to read. And I made them promise not even to tell their wives what we would be announcing. I had their full support. And immediately after delivering the speech, I called my caucus together of all National Party MPs, apologized that I couldn't take them into my full confidence ahead of time, and I had their full support. So it was a joint decision. It was my privilege to lead and formulate the final announcements.
Do you remember when you were making that announcement in Parliament, the reaction that you got from members of Parliament?
It's quite clear in my mind, yes. There was shock, there was exultation from some sides. There were angry protests from the Conservative side, Dr. Treurnig and his people, and it caused, for a little while, some chaos in Parliament. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. Neither could the march which was taking outside when Archbishop Desmond Tutu and others who were leading the march were told what I announced. There was confusion in their ranks. They didn't expect that. They all expected an announcement that Mr. Mandela would be released, but not the far-reaching announcement that I made.
So to what extent did the fall of the Soviet Union and international pressure against your then National Party government contribute to the unbanning of liberation movements and the freeing of political prisoners, and then, of course, the beginning of negotiations?
Well, let me firstly say, as far as international pressure is concerned, yes, it kept us on our toes. But we didn't take the initiatives which we took because of international pressure. We could have withstood that for a much longer time. Also, it wasn't the military threat from the ANC which forced us to do so. Today, incorrectly, it is presented as if this was a victory for the ANC. No, it was an initiative from our side. What I announced that day wasn't negotiated. I couldn't have made that speech if the Berlin Wall didn't come down. With the communist threat, which was more real than people nowadays believe, it wasn't just Reds under beds. It was a real threat. There was a strategy to get under direct or indirect control Southern Africa under Soviet control. But when the Berlin Wall came down and Soviet communism failed and imploded, I could make the far-reaching announcements which I made on that day. Without that, I would have made a much more restricted speech. So yes, it opened a window of opportunity for us. We saw the window and we jumped through that window.
When was the first time that you met Nelson Mandela?
I met Mr. Mandela the first time in December 1989. I became president in September, and he was brought to me from the Victor Verster under cover of darkness. I met him in my office at Tuinhuis, which later became his office. And he and I had a discussion not on the issues that we would negotiate about later. We were feeling each other out. We were trying to understand the person sitting opposite. And both of us could later write in our autobiographies that after that first meeting, we felt it would be possible to build trust between us, and we felt that I can do business with this man. It was a good meeting, and I was impressed by his stature, by his dignity, by his capacity to listen, by his analytical thinking. He was a wonderful man.
If there were two things that you would do differently, what would that be?
All the major decisions that I took, now with the advantage of hindsight, I would have taken again. Even accepting the final constitution, notwithstanding some of his shortcomings. So many things on the more tactical side I would have done differently with the advantage of hindsight. But the big decisions, to make that speech, the content of that speech, to call a referendum when it appeared as if I was losing my mandate to negotiate a new dispensation, all those decisions I would have taken again. The signing of the constitution, the interim constitution, the signing of the final constitution, I would have done it all because it had to be done to bring justice to all.
February the 11th, 1990, the day Nelson Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison. Where were you?
First, a little anecdote. When I saw him again between the 2nd of February and the 11th, again in my office, to tell him we will be releasing him on the 11th. And Mr. Mandela said, "No, Mr. President." I said, "Why no?" He said, "It's too soon." I said, "Why is it too soon?" He said, "No, I need time to prepare." I said, "Mr. Mandela, you and I are going to negotiate about many things. But the date of your release is not negotiable. You've been in jail long enough. Let's negotiate the time of the day." I was in front of the TV. I stayed out of the public eye on that day that he was released. I watched it all. I was worried that things might get out of hand, that the jubilation might evolve into a sort of a protest, breaking things, doing damage to cars, etc., etc. Fortunately, it did not happen. So I was deeply concerned and very pleased at the end that it went rather peacefully.
You were not concerned about a backlash from the right wing?
Well, there was a backlash from the moment that I made the speech. The backlash started even before, when I released in September 1989, already Mr. Governor Mbeki and Mr. Walter Sisulu and a few others, as a sort of a pre-run to the release of Mr. Mandela. So that was always on the cards, that from the right wing there would be vehement backlash.
Now, Mr. Mandela used to speak very highly of you and had a lot of respect for you. But he also did criticize you publicly and even on international platforms. How did that make you feel?
Very bad. There were times when there was great tension between us. He accused me of not doing enough to stop the political violence and the role that elements in the security forces played in it. It was a false accusation. I appointed the Goldstone Commission. I fired or put on early retirement some 28 senior people in the military intelligence side. I took various steps. I never looked away from it. I tried to get to the bottom of it. I called together the top 400 people in the police and the 400 top people in the Defence Force on 2 occasions, telling them, you will no longer be involved in politics. Your task is to guard the borders of South Africa, to hold South Africa safe and to fight crime and to keep the people of South Africa safe. So I was hurt by it, and but in the end we always succeeded in overcoming those tensions, in taking hands and in working together towards a common goal of establishing a new dispensation, of promoting reconciliation in South Africa. He was wonderful at that. It is his biggest legacy, his commitment to reconciliation, which is so sad that we have lost that in South Africa today, the South Africa of 2020. That we are back to racial tensions, that we are back to stereotyping of various races on a racial basis, that too much of life has been racialized again. It's a pity.
Which brings me to my next question about the current state of South Africa. What advice would you give to the present government?
I think we're on the wrong road at the moment. I think we must return to the pragmatic approaches of between 1994 and 2007. We must return to following the type of economic policies which resulted in us bringing our national debt down dramatically, which resulted in more than 5% in real-term economic growth under Trevor Manuel as Minister of Finance and President Mbeki. We need to address the unemployment in South Africa. We need to address the problem of so many millions of South Africans living in abject poverty. We need economic growth, and we need to bring policy certainty so that we can get investment again. We don't need to amend Section 25 of the Constitution. We don't need to bring the uncertainty of the protection of private property ownership into the system, which obviously put off any foreign or local investor to put any more new money in South Africa. We need to return to what worked in the new South Africa from 1994.
But will you acknowledge and say that apartheid was a bad and evil system, and that we are still suffering from the legacy of apartheid today?
There is a fallacy that I've never completely apologized for the pain and hurt and the wrongness of apartheid. It's wrong. I've done so many times. Apartheid was wrong. Apartheid was morally unjustifiable. We didn't only say sorry for that. I made the speech on the 2nd of February 1990. We took the initiative to rectify the wrongness of apartheid and to bring justice to all in South Africa. I sincerely believe that, yes, apartheid has left marks which are still visible today and which people still feel today. But to blame everything which is wrong in South Africa today, after 25 years on apartheid, is also not true.
Coming back again to your relationship with Mr. Nelson Mandela, is there anything today that you regret not having said to him?
No. We became very good friends after both of our retirement. Both of us retired. We really became good friends. We visited each other at each other's homes. We regularly spoke on the telephone. He attended and made a wonderful speech at my 70th birthday. So no, I had a wonderful relationship with him in our last years. I miss him. He was a very good, impressive man.
And what do you do these days?
I have two foundations. The one is the F W De Klerk Foundation, focused on upholding the Constitution, focused on promoting solution-oriented dialogue. And I have the Global Leadership Foundation, where I brought together more than 40 former presidents, prime ministers, cabinet ministers, all of us retired, and what we do is not for money, not for fees. We give quiet, discreet, confidential advice to governments in the developing world, helping them to make things better in their country.
And just lastly, Mr. De Klerk, what message do you have for the people of South Africa?
My message to the people of South Africa is get onto the playing field. We can't leave politics just to the politicians. We need to do the right things now. We're on the wrong road. We need to get back to good inter-ethnic relationships. We need to take hands and work together. We need to ensure that South Africa fulfill its tremendous potential. And for that we need civil society on the playing field. We need individuals on the playing field. We need the private sector on the playing field. We cannot sit in corners and bemoan what we feel is wrong in South Africa. We need to get off our backsides, start working to make South Africa the successful country it can be.
Mr. De Klerk, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everything of the best.